Welcome back to the Changemaker Podcast. I'm your host, Deke Copenhaver. Today, my guest is Jackie Ferguson. Jackie is co-founder and head of content and programming for the Diversity Movement, an award-winning organization that creates stronger business outcomes through strengthening culture and belonging. Jackie is a certified diversity executive, national speaker, author of the Inclusive Language Handbook, and the host of the top-rated diversity podcast, Diversity Beyond the Checkbook. Just an amazing lady. So everybody put your hands together and welcome Jackie.
Welcome to the Changemaker Podcast, hosted by Deke Copenhaver. Deke is the author of The Changemaker, a Forbes publishing book that has reached #1 on Amazon on multiple occasions and in multiple categories like management skills and total quality management. During this podcast, Deke interviews exceptional change-making leaders. Deke currently operates Copenhaver Consulting, where he helps local governments and other public organizations maximize their potential. He's also a sought-after public speaker. We hope that the Changemaker has an impact on you today and that you find takeaways that make you a better leader in your life. Now, here's Deke.
Thank you so much, Deke. I'm so glad to be here with you.
I know. I'm so glad that we've connected. But so we have a lot to discuss today. But just for our listeners and viewers, how did you become a part of, doing what you do now? What in life led you here?
Yeah. So, Deke, I always start by saying I was born into diversity and inclusion because I come from a multicultural, multiracial, multi-generational, multi-regional family. So just around my dinner table, I got to hear a lot of different perspectives on the same topic and then begin to understand how to really listen, right?
Yeah.
To understand, and also how to communicate with people who have different points of view. And so, that's where it started. I, throughout my career, have worked in many different fields, including HR, which, of course, there was the DEI component where I started to really understand the impact of DEI and belonging on organizations. And then while I was with a marketing firm, actually, what we determined was to have that multicultural viewpoint in marketing.
Yeah.
And an inclusive mindset in marketing is so important as our culture shifts. And so we created a course, and I led the build for that, to help marketers understand more about DEI. And what occurred was we had a lot of organizations take this course and then say, okay, this is great, but what's next? So that's how the diversity movement was formed.
It's interesting to me because I think people are socialized in different ways. Mm-hmm. So I've got a friend who's a local elected official that grew up in a impoverished inner city neighborhood. We didn't agree on everything, but I grew up in a country club community. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, so naturally, our worldviews are going to be different.
Yes.
My worldview would have been more like his if I'd grown up in his neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make somebody bad or wrong just because they were socialized differently.
Deke, that's exactly right. We all see through our own lens of experience.
Yeah.
And that's not a wrong thing. We all do that, right? But one of the things that we need to think about, and just as you said, is being able to be open to other perspectives, because the way you navigate the world affects your view of everything. It affects your view of how you think about people, how you problem solve, what happens when you're having a good day or a bad day, right?
Yeah.
All of those experiences affect each part of our life, and it's not a bad thing. We just have to recognize it and then be open to other perspectives that help us grow and think more broadly.
Well, that's what I often share with people. I'm like, I don't think it's possible to grow as a person if you're only around people that look like you and act like you and think like you all the time. And for me, life is a constant journey and it's about growth. And to grow, you have to value other perspectives.
Absolutely. You're so right. And we all like to feel like we're right? When we have those friends that are like, I totally agree with you, you're right, same perspective. We all want that from time to time. But that's not where the change comes in. That's not where growth comes in, as you said. We have to really challenge the way we think about things to broaden the perspective. And it doesn't mean that we change our opinion. It just means that we're open to other perspectives and other points around that topic to understand that not everyone feels the way that we do. Something may be right for me and wrong for someone else, right? And so that's okay. We just, again, want to be really open to other perspectives because we can only see through our lens, and
Well,
that's not broad.
no, well, it's interesting to me because I know a number of people, I won't paint with too broad of a brush, but that make the assumption that homeless people choose to be homeless, which I'm like, but I've gotten to, through my wife and my travels, and here locally, I've gotten to know a lot of homeless people. So my question to somebody now that says that people choose to be homeless, I'm like, well, how many homeless people do you know?
Yes, thank you,
None.
Deke. That's right.
I'm like, but I've spoken to homeless people in Augusta and in Columbia, South Carolina, all over the place, Charleston, South Carolina. They don't want to be homeless. I mean, a lot of it's a question of mental health. I mean, but it's there, but for the grace of God go I.
Absolutely.
I mean, some people can just be down on their luck.
That's right. Deke, that's exactly right. We make assumptions about people based on our own experience, our point of view. And what we're not doing is just what you said. How many homeless people have you talked to, right? Have you asked about their circumstance? And very often it can be one event, right, that sets someone in a path to homelessness. And, again, like you said, but the grace of God go I. And it's like just that one experience can change a whole trajectory for a person's life. And we're all susceptible to that.
Well, it's, you made me a part of a DEI webinar here recently, which thank you for doing that. That was such a
Thank you.
wonderful, wonderful experience. But I was telling my wife afterwards, I don't hold myself out to be an expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion. But to me, it's just a question of what my parents taught me. Treat everybody with dignity and respect and treat people fairly.
Yes.
And I think, and we've discussed, it's become such a political issue, which it's not to me.
That's right. Yeah, I'm not sure where we as a country kind of got off track to where it needs to be polarized. If we think about people as just as people, and do people deserve to feel safe? Yes, right? Most of us can agree to that. Do people deserve to feel respected? Yes. Do people need to feel welcome in the environments in which they live and work? The answer should be yes. And if you start there with that just fundamental understanding and agreement, now we can have conversations that build on that. But, unfortunately, we're so pit against each other in the way we believe. And it's okay to have differing opinions on things, but it doesn't mean that we're on opposite sides. How can we come together to, and those fundamental agreements work towards that to make sure that every person feels respected and valued and safe in their environments?
Well, extreme polarization is just doing damage to families, to
Yes.
communities, to businesses, obviously in politics. But I want to get your take on something that recently happened in the state legislature in Tennessee, where you had two African-American members of that body just voted out by the majority. And I'm like, how does that, I am apolitical. I'm an apolitical former politician. But I'm like, just the optics on that look so bad. You've got duly elected people and they're just kicked out of the state legislature. To me, that's ridiculous. Whatever side would do it.
Right. And, they were kicked out for voicing their opinions and participating in a peaceful protest around gun laws. And, people should be allowed to have their opinions. I remember, Deke, just thinking back from a political standpoint, when I placed my vote, it wasn't necessarily for, or ever, right? Could it be for a person that aligned with every single value and everything that I thought about? But really, it was about, does this person have enough? Do we have enough of the same similarities in the way we're thinking about things to be a better choice? And then most importantly, Deke, for me, it was, is this person going to make the decision that they think is best for the country?
Exactly. And that's leadership.
Right.
To give in constantly to the vocal minority is not leadership. To me, that's cowardice. But that's what
right.
we see a lot of.
Absolutely. And if you do that, you're really just bouncing back from one side to the other,
Yeah.
this way and that way. And leadership, as you said, is really about what do I know, right? What's the research I need to do to be able to make the best decision for this country, for this company, for, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's real leadership. And that's how I've always placed my votes. And I think that's the most important thing. It doesn't have to be a person that agrees with, or that, aligns with everything that you believe.
Yeah.
But enough of it, and then trust that that person is a person of integrity. And I think, unfortunately, we've moved away from that a little bit. And that's unfortunate.
It's interesting. While I was in office, I joined a group called Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Because I'm kind of naive at times, and I'm like, well, who wouldn't be against illegal guns?
Right.
So it ended up being very controversial with gun control groups. And so there's a group called Georgia Gun Owners that targeted me and the other mayors in Georgia that had signed on to this and said, these are the anti-gun mayors. I grew up a hunter, and I'm a gun owner myself.
Yeah.
And so these people would call me, and I'm like, look, I own guns. I'm not totally against guns. To me, it's kind of like, it's common sense. Guns that are produced to kill people and not animals should not be easy to get. Common sense, I would think.
Agree. Deke, I totally agree.
But so after I get targeted by this group, my first day in office, we had started a prayer breakfast that 17 years later is still going on. No city resources were ever spent. The churches or places of worship that hosted it, provided breakfast. So I get a letter from 2 weeks after being targeted by the Georgia Gun Owners Association from the Freedom from Religion Foundation saying that I was violating the separation of church and state by having a prayer breakfast. So I'm like, well, if I'm catching it from the extremes on either end, I'm probably doing what's right for the majority of the people that I serve,
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And, we have to really think about, what do we believe? What's the research that we have done? How many conversations have we had, back to your earlier point, to get to what we think is the right thing, right? There's always going to be people on either side that are, that think you're not doing enough, think you're doing too much, think you're thinking about it wrong. We want to make sure that we're doing the absolute best that we can for the people that were chosen, to serve. And so, again, whether that be in politics and business, in our communities, that's what's important.
Well, several years ago, I did a owner's retreat for Wild Wings, which is a wing place, and so franchise. But I spoke for 2 hours about creating cultures. And that's effectively what we did when I was in office. We created a culture that was business friendly. We treated our employees with dignity and respect. They provided excellent customer service. But I spoke for 2 hours, and I told my wife afterwards, I said, I could have summed that up very succinctly. Treat your employees and your customers the way you want to be treated. It's pretty much that simple. The execution of that is not very easy at times, but it's just do unto others. I mean, pretty much.
Absolutely. And you're right. Simple, but not easy, right?
Yeah.
All of us have unconscious biases, right?
Oh,
Based on, our experience, our upbringing, lots of different factors. And that's all of us. It's not some people, that's all of us. And so those things are, infiltrate our thinking. Because our brain tries to sort into categories.
Yeah.
And so we really have to think about, what are the measurable action steps that we can take to create that culture of belonging. So wishing for it, right, like so many
Yeah.
things, doesn't make it happen. So what are the actionable things that we can do to make sure that we're creating cultures of belonging? And ultimately, Deke, that's really good for business. If you think
Oh,
about
yeah.
innovation, problem solving, I think Oxford did a study that employees that are happy, right, have those cultures of belonging, are 13% more productive.
Yeah.
And so if you think about it just from a profitability standpoint, if your employees are now 13% more productive, you're making much more money, based on the fact that you're giving that space for the importance of that culture that you want and that they expect now in the workplace. And then you have a more productive team, a happier team, a more innovative team. And that is needed for sustainable business.
Well, and that's what I've shared with people, that you need to be an employer of choice now, where people actually look forward to coming to work.
That's
But
right.
you think about Gen Z is the most diverse generation in history,
That's right.
and they value diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as an employer, if you can't connect with that generation, which, by the way, Gen Z and millennials next year will comprise 45% of the electorate. So politically and business-wise, if you're judging them saying, well, I just don't agree with them,
Right.
from a sustainability standpoint, business-wise or politically, if you can't connect with that generation, you're going to lose.
Absolutely. Deke, that's so right. And for, as a Gen Xer myself, it's easy to say, well, I don't understand, or why do they think like this, right? But they are so interested in not only the places that they work for aligning from a value standpoint, but the places that they shop, how they vote, right? They are doing so much more research than we ever did to make sure that where they place their time, their money is aligns with their values.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be forthcoming with that so that they can do that proper research, or they're not going to choose you. And it's, again, because we're so much more diverse, and you're right, Gen Z, so more diverse than any other
Yeah.
generation. And so you have to understand how to message, right, this generation, how to appeal to this generation, how to influence this generation. One of the examples that I use a lot, Deke, is, if you think about Blockbuster, right? And again,
Yeah.
as a Gen Xer, every Friday night, I was picking up my two, new releases and
Oh,
my
yeah.
popcorn, right? And, and so Netflix went into a meeting with Blockbuster and said, hey, we've got this great idea, right? Blockbuster was like, there's no way this is going to change. This is the culture. But the culture was changing.
Yeah.
And none of us can locate our Blockbuster card, right?
No. No.
And so you have to understand how society is changing, how the trends are changing, how behaviors are changing in order to have sustainable business. And if you're not doing that, if you don't have your finger on the pulse of what's happening, you're gonna fizzle out and be outdated in your practices, in your leadership, in your offerings like Blockbuster.
Well, and, whether it be millennials or Gen Z, I've embraced those generations because I love them. They're so creative. They're so connected. And I'm
Yes.
Gen X too. But we make assumptions about generations, right? So Gen X, we were shoegazers. We were lazy. We were all this, which is what we call every generation behind us. I'm like,
Right.
no, they're creative. They're inclusive. And here again, 45% of the electorate. And that's what I tell my friends in that generation. I'm like, those generations, you have the opportunity to create wholesale change
Yes.
in this nation if you want to do it. I seek to empower them, not concern myself with them taking away my power.
Absolutely. And that's good leadership, Deke. If you're thinking about yourself from a what do I gain, how do I look, rather than how am I giving, how am I pouring into others, how am I opening my own perspective, how am I giving more time for other voices to be heard. That's the mark of a good leader.
Well, and I said it on the webinar that you've made me a part of. People often would ask me, if Augusta was a food, what would it be? And I said it'd be a gumbo.
Right.
Because everybody knows that gumbo wouldn't taste nearly as good if it only had one ingredient. So
exactly right.
I embrace diversity, and I think it's just, we should see it as a beautiful thing, not as a threat or, anything bad. But I think it is the politicization of it so somebody reached out to me after that webinar and wanted me to lecture at some events that they're putting on.
Yeah.
Because she said, you're the demographic we're trying to reach. You're a 55-year-old straight white male. And I'm like, well, hopefully I'm a 55-year-old straight white male that gets it.
Yeah, absolutely. Deke, I love that you use that gumbo example. And to stay on that for a second, another thing that's great about gumbo is that all of the ingredients stand on their own, right? They're all individual. You taste this, you taste this. It's not mixed together, melded together. It can be its own thing in this beautiful, stew, right? But each thing, you taste the okra, you taste the shrimp, you taste sausage. So those things are all their own thing.
Yeah.
So you're not melding them together to create a new thing. They're allowed to be what they are, and they're all together create such an amazing food.
And that's one thing I've said about particularly kids here in Augusta. I wish everybody had the opportunity to travel because it gives you such a great appreciation of different cultures. If yours is the only culture you've ever seen, it's hard to have an appreciation of different cultures.
That's right. Absolutely. And that's, I think, Deke, for those of us who are in the DEI space, one of the things that we have to realize is for those of us who are further along on this DEI journey, right? I very rarely use the word expert because with people, things change and are updated all the time. And so when you're on this journey, some are further along than others. As I said, I was born into, right?
Yeah.
This understanding of people think differently about the same topic sometimes. And, I would say that what's most important is that we're just giving space to understand that for those people that have not been able to move outside of their experience based on the community they grew up in or their family or whatever.
Yeah.
Be patient, right? You want to give them a little bit at a time to broaden that perspective because they really just have never thought about any, certain things outside of their frame of reference. And so it's important to be patient with those folks.
Well, I learned a very valuable lesson from my wife. I think it was our first year in marriage. And so she was telling me an issue she was dealing with. And like most men do, I'm like, well, you need to do this to fix it. She was like, I don't want you to fix my problem. I just want you to listen to me. And so that was a great lesson. And I'm like, I think and once again, I say leadership is if you have to use fear and intimidation to get your desired outcome, that's bullying, plain and simple.
Absolutely.
Leadership is about making people feel safe, secure, and that their voices are heard. Plain and simple.
That's exactly right, Deke. I totally agree. And, so often I say that we listen to respond. We don't listen to understand.
Yeah.
And if we would stop and listen to understand, I think we'd be a lot further, right? If I've got my point and no matter what you say, Deke, I'm going to get this point across. I'm not hearing you. And hearing and listening, real listening, is what creates understanding, and understanding is what heals communities.
No, and that's what we, as communities, as a nation, I mean, every day I pray for healing because we really need it. But it's interesting. So it starts with us that I'm on the board of or whatever.
Yes.
So we did a report recently that came out. I may have referenced it on here or not. But so there are members in Congress that are doing bipartisan work. But the hyper-partisan members of Congress on either side get 4 times more press coverage
Yes.
than the ones doing the difficult bipartisan work. So there are good things going on out there. We just need to find them and highlight them. And there's great work being done in the bridging field. And to me, the work you're doing is so amazing, and you're such an inspiration.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, the most important thing is to create the bridges,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we want to create so that we can understand each other. We're, a community of people, a country of people with different experiences, different backgrounds, and all of that is okay. I think it's a matter of having those conversations that allows us to understand each other more, open our perspectives. And, again, some people think, well, I don't want to change. I think what I think is right. I don't want to change my perspective. You don't necessarily have to change your perspective. But
No.
understanding that that's not the only perspective is what's important. And understanding that that's not the only perspective that can be right.
Well, and, I think about, with regards to leadership, to me, leadership isn't about making people feel like they fit in. It's making them feel like they belong.
Yes.
And so I often tell the story. I was born in Montreal, Canada, and moved to Augusta, Georgia at 4 years old, thick Canadian accent, painfully shy. So I knew what it was like to feel like an outsider.
Yeah.
So I think that created in me. And my mom was a liberal Democrat, my dad a conservative Republican. So they never voted the same way in presidential election in over 40 years of marriage. But I've seen how, I've seen what it's like to feel like an outsider, and seen how good it makes people feel to feel like they're included and that they belong. And I've also seen that a difference in opinions politically doesn't have to separate a family or a marriage. It can be made to work once again if we're willing to listen to each other. And my mom and dad had a rule: they would never go to bed mad.
I love that. My grandparents had the same rule, and they were married until my grandmother passed away, 60 years.
Yeah.
And so so smart, right? And that's one of the issues I think that we have in this country is that, we disagree, so now we're polarized, right? I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're bad. And that's not the case, right? We can think differently about different things based on our experience, based on our perspective, based on our education and research. And that's okay.
Yeah.
What's important is to keep those communication lines open, try to understand another perspective. Sometimes it may sway your opinion, sometimes not. But the most important thing is to understand that you as an individual don't or can't have all the answers.
No, well, it's growing up, as I say, my dad was a conservative Republican. I identified myself as a Republican. But as I got older, I'm like, I'm probably, and I think this would be the majority of Americans, I'm more fiscally conservative and probably socially a little bit more liberal.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I don't fit with the extremes of either party, so I'm just happily independent. But it's funny, I go back to socialization. There are so many people that I know that I can say, why are you a Republican? My mom and dad were Republicans. Or why are you a Democrat? My mom and dad were Democrats. Well, can you tell me all the planks in either party's platform? Well, no.
Right.
But it's just, I was raised in a Democrat household or a Republican household. But I think it's good to question our beliefs and think really. I tell people, I don't want to know just what somebody believes. I'm more interested in, how was your belief system created?
Yeah.
Why do you think the way you do? And I'm not going to label you bad or wrong for believing a certain way, but I'm more interested in seeing what makes people tick. And that curiosity is key.
Absolutely. And Deke, I really agree with the fact that the majority of us, I believe, are somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Right? But the extremes get all the press.
Yeah.
And so we think as a whole that those extremes are the majority, but really most of us feel this way, sway a little bit, that sway a little the other way, depending on what the topic is, and find themselves somewhere in the middle. And I think that if we had more attention on that, we'd be more focused on finding the common ground, which I think is so important, whether you're speaking politically, in your communities, in your workplace, in your family.
It's so sad though. I share with people that basically social media has given the extremes a megaphone.
Yes.
But I never gave in to the extremes when I was in office, and still don't do that. But I tell people, okay, basically, and my wife and I don't have kids, so I'm not speaking as a parent. I do have 11 great nieces and nephews and 10 nieces and nephews. But I'm like, as a community, as a business owner, what if you raised kids to where you gave in to them every time they threw a tantrum? Mm-hmm. And effectively, if we're letting the extremes get their way just because they're the vocal minority and they're the loudest, what kind of a business are you going to build, or a community are you going to build, or a nation for that matter?
That's exactly right. It's important to hear different sides, but you want to also really consider the people that think thoughtfully about those issues, right? Because once you start digging in, Deke, to your question of, well, why do you feel that way? Well, tell me about this. Those extremists on either side really don't have great answers.
No.
It's those folks in the middle that, well, I grew up like this and I think like that, or I had this experience. And those are the places where you can really find amazing nuggets of information to help shape your own perspectives. Because you hear these things and these experiences and these perspectives that make you sometimes say, right, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that. And, we really need to focus more on the people who want to really thoughtfully dig in with us and have real conversations where we can influence each other in a positive way.
And that is precisely what this podcast is about, making people think. But I bring people on of different ideologies, but it's about, here again, leadership is bringing people together on common ground. And I know that's what my life's calling is, whether I do it through this, my book, speaking engagements, coaching, whatever. It's let's find that common ground, because I love that. And I think most people want that, but we need to provide the forums and the places and the outlets where people can have those conversations when not having arguments.
Absolutely. And there's always common ground to be found, right? If you dig into that conversation long enough, you can find common ground with any person.
Yeah.
And if you start there and then build the conversation on that, I think you have so much better outcomes.
Well, and I think if you start a conversation with, okay, how are we alike? Mm-hmm. Where is the common ground? Let's start the discussion there, not on how we're different, mm-hmm. Not on how we disagree politically or anything. What kind of music do you like? Who's your favorite sports team?
Right.
It's not that difficult. How's your family? Mm-hmm. Do you have brothers and sisters? It's just, there's so much more, but it can't be just the conversation that starts with how do we disagree, mm-hmm. is, to me, there's no way to heal us through those conversations.
Deke, you're so right. And ultimately, to have difficult conversations, you need to have a level of empathy for that person with that person, and a level of connection. Because if Deke, if you and I have a level of connection, then even when we disagree, it's not going to be disrespectful. It's not going to be dismissive, right? We want to understand each other's point because we have that connection that we've established. And so that's what's important for people to start with, right? They want to jump into these conversations about where they disagree rather than creating that foundation and that layer of understanding and empathy first, and then having the conversation where you're naturally going to be more open to listening because you've developed a rapport with that person.
Well, and to me, we have this wonderful opportunity as a nation and a world. We have the shared experience of all having gone through COVID. So
Yes.
it impacted everybody. So can we start there? You know, what was your experience like we're still going through COVID, but everybody was impacted by it. So that's one thing I think we can start with. I share with people, every family I know has been impacted in some way by mental health or addiction issues or by cancer. So
Yes.
there are so many things that we have these shared experiences, but let's start the dialogue there.
Absolutely. Think that's just 100% right. And if we were to do that, right, we would have more constructive conversations rather than shouting back and forth at each other.
Yeah,
But to really be open to understand a different perspective. And again, it's not about changing your perspective. It's just about understanding that your perspective is not the only perspective.
exactly. Well, Jackie, as we get down towards the end, I've got two questions for you.
Yeah.
One, where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me at thediversitymovement.com. Please feel free to go there. We've got lots of amazing resources. And then on LinkedIn. So you can all find me on LinkedIn. Jackie Ferguson is my name, and I look forward to connecting there.
Well, I look forward to a regular series, Home and Away. I've got a reschedule coming on your podcast, and I've
Yes, I'm
apologized for
excited.
missing that, but I look forward to it. But my last question, on a regular basis, what puts a smile on your face and brings joy to your heart?
That's an easy one, Deke. My daughter, Diana, she is 21. She has been the light of my life for, since she was born, and still brings a smile to my face every time I can interact with her.
Well, Jackie, thank you for being an amazing guest. Thank you for your time. I know you're a very busy lady, but you have been wonderful to be with, and we will continue the dialogue for sure.
Absolutely, Deke. I enjoyed it, and thank you for all the things you're doing as well.
Absolutely. Well, that's all the time we've got. Dropping the mic, and we are out.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to or watching the Changemaker podcast today. Greatly appreciate it. If you're listening and you want to see the video, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Deke Copenhaver. That's a pretty easy to remember, I would think. But really, we also want to remind you to like, subscribe, rate across all platforms, download. And if you're looking for a coach, a speaker, or anything, you know where to find me. Just email me at dekecopenhaver.com. And thanks so much for listening.